a secret affair, a love child born during the honeymoon, countless infidelities, and a separation that rattled the royal family to its core. This isn't just the plot of a TV drama. It's the real-life story of Princess Margaret and her husband, Anthony Armstrong-Jones. Theirs was always an unconventional love story, one that promised to bring a blast of fresh, modern air into the stuffy halls of Buckingham Palace, but instead, it devolved into one of the biggest royal scandals of the 20th century. Princess Margaret's wedding was a global phenomenon. It was the first ever royal wedding to be televised, and a massive audience, with some estimates as high as 300 million people, tuned in. The world saw a picture-perfect fairy tale, a gorgeous, rebellious princess finally finding her happily ever after with a handsome bohemian photographer. But behind the grandeur of Westminster Abbey and the roar of the crowds, a shocking secret was already brewing, one that would redefine scandal for the royals. As the world watched the princess sail off on a 6-week Caribbean honeymoon, a child was born back in England who was secretly her new husband's. This bombshell, which stayed hidden for over 4 decades, wasn't just a one-off betrayal. It was the opening act in a marriage so turbulent it would lead to the first divorce for a senior royal in decades, forever changing how the public saw the monarchy. To really get the shock of the scandal, you have to understand the fairy tale it destroyed. Princess Margaret Rose, Queen Elizabeth II's younger sister, was the it girl of her time, glamorous, stylish, and a total fashion icon. She was the royal rebel of the 1950s, with a spark and a stubborn streak that often clashed with the stiff rules of the court. But her life was already defined by a very public heartbreak. In her early 20s, Margaret fell head over heels for Group Captain Peter Townsend, a dashing war hero who had been her late father's equerry. By all accounts, he was the love of her life. But there was a huge problem. Townsend was divorced. In the deeply conservative Britain of the 1950s, where the Queen was the head of a church that forbade remarriage after divorce, a union like that was impossible for a senior royal. The government and the palace flatly refused. Margaret faced a brutal choice: her royal duty or the man she loved. On October 31, 1955, she released a devastating statement confirming that she had to give him up. The nation's heart broke right along with hers. For years, Margaret was seen as this tragic figure who had sacrificed her own happiness for the crown. The public was desperate for her to find love. So when she met Anthony Armstrong-Jones, a charismatic society photographer, it felt like her moment had finally arrived. Known as Tony, he was a commoner, a world away from the aristocrats who usually courted the princess. He was exciting, artsy, and ran in circles of actors and intellectuals, a life far from the stuffy confines of the palace. Their relationship started as a secret affair, hidden from the press. He'd visit her discreetly at Clarence's house, and even though they went to the same parties, no one guessed he was her new love. According to some reports, Margaret's decision to marry Tony was impulsive, made the very day she got a letter from Peter Townsend announcing his own engagement. She was later quoted as saying, "I received a letter from Peter in the morning, and that evening I decided to marry Tony." On February 26, 1960, the engagement was announced, taking everyone by surprise. Tony designed the ring himself, a ruby surrounded by diamonds, made to look like a rose for Margaret's middle name. The public was absolutely captivated. This wasn't some arranged royal match. It felt like a modern love story. The wedding, set for May 6, 1960, was planned as a massive national celebration. As the first royal wedding to be broadcast on TV, it brought the monarchy into millions of living rooms. A global audience watched the princess in her stunning Norman Hartnell gown and the magnificent Poltimore tiara walking down the aisle of Westminster Abbey on the arm of Prince Philip. Behind the scenes, though, there were whispers of disapproval. While the British public was thrilled, many of Europe's royal houses looked down on a king's daughter marrying a photographer. The guest list was notably light on foreign royals. leading some to see it as a quiet snub. But on that sunny May day, with crowds cheering in the streets of London, none of that seemed to matter. As the newlyweds waved from the balcony of Buckingham Palace, it felt like the start of a new, modern chapter for the House of Windsor. They set off on a lavish 6-week honeymoon on the royal yacht Britannia, looking like the picture of bliss. The fairy tale seemed complete, but the truth was much, much darker. While Princess Margaret and her new husband, now titled the Earl of Snowdon, were being celebrated in the Caribbean, something life-altering was happening back in England. On May 28, 1960, just 3 weeks after their wedding, a woman named Camilla Fry gave birth to a daughter, Polly. Camilla was married to Tony's best friend, Jeremy Fry. For over 40 years, Polly grew up believing Jeremy was her father. The secret stayed buried for decades, a ticking time bomb at the heart of the Snowdons' marriage. The deception ran deep. According to biographers, Jeremy Fry was so close to Tony that he was supposed to be the best man at the wedding. He had to step down at the last minute, with the official reason being a bout of ill health. However, later reports suggested the real reason was a past conviction for a minor homosexual offense, which would have been a major embarrassment. The relationships between Tony and the Frys were reportedly unconventional. Biographies have alleged that Tony was involved with both Jeremy and Camilla Fry. Tony was known for having numerous relationships with both men and women, with one biographer noting the sentiment among his circle was, "If it moves, he'll have it." Polly Fry's birth was the ultimate betrayal, happening during what should have been the most romantic time for the newlyweds. It established a pattern of infidelity that would define their marriage from the start. As royal historian Robert Lacey noted, "You see how Margaret was a victim of Tony Armstrong-Jones even before they got married." While Margaret almost certainly didn't know about this devastating secret at the time, it proves that the fairy tale was built on a lie from its very inception. The truth about Polly's father wasn't publicly confirmed until 2004, years after Margaret's death. After a lifetime of rumors, Polly, then 45, convinced Lord Snowdon to take a DNA test. It confirmed her biological father was Anthony Armstrong-Jones. Snowdon initially denied it, and Jeremy Fry called the claim utter nonsense, but after Jeremy's death, Snowdon finally admitted the truth. Polly later wrote about the discovery. "Finding out at the age of 45 that the man I had idolized and put on a pedestal higher than Nelson's column since I was a small child was not in fact my father was a hard burden to bear." The revelation was a scandal on its own, but its timing, born during the honeymoon, forever tainted the memory of the wedding that had captivated the world. For the first few years, the marriage seemed happy on the surface. The couple, known as the Snowdons, moved into apartments at Kensington Palace and became the it couple of the swinging 60s, hosting parties that mixed aristocrats with artists and celebrities. They had 2 children, David, born in 1961, and Sarah in 1964. But behind the glamorous front, the marriage was already starting to crumble. Margaret and Tony were both strong-willed, used to the spotlight, and not great at compromising. Margaret expected her husband to be by her side at royal events. Tony, however, was fiercely protective of his photography career with the Sunday Times magazine, which often took him away for weeks, leaving Margaret feeling neglected and lonely. That distance became a breeding ground for affairs on both sides. Tony was unfaithful from the beginning. One of his most serious affairs was with Lady Jacqueline Rufus Isaacs. Margaret eventually sought comfort elsewhere, too, beginning an affair in 1966 with Anthony Barton, a family friend, while her husband was away. Their marriage turned into a psychological war, filled with petty cruelties, mostly from Tony. Biographers say he would leave nasty notes for Margaret to find, like one tucked in a book that reportedly read, "You look like a Jewish manicurist and I hate you." For a woman who had been treated with total deference her whole life, this kind of cruelty was devastating. Their once fabulous parties became a battleground where they would have vicious arguments in front of their friends. The modern fairy tale had soured into a toxic, miserable partnership. The public was mostly unaware of how bad things had gotten, still holding on to the image of the glamorous couple who broke the mold. But it was only a matter of time before their private war exploded into public view. By the 1970s, the marriage was a wreck. Margaret and Tony were living separate lives under the same roof at Kensington Palace. The rumors that had been whispered for years were about to become front-page news. The dam finally broke in February 1976. While on holiday on the private island of Mustique, Princess Margaret was photographed with Roddy Llewellyn, a landscape gardener 17 years her junior. The grainy, long-lens photos showed the two of them in swimsuits, enjoying the sun. By today's standards, the pictures were tame, but in 1976 they were a bombshell. The tabloids went wild, painting Margaret as a predator. The affair wasn't new, but the public exposure was the final nail in the coffin of her marriage. Lord Snowdon, who was in Australia for work, played the part of the wronged husband perfectly. He released a statement saying he was desperately sad, masterfully controlling the narrative. On March 19, 1976, Kensington Palace made it official. Her Royal Highness, the Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, and the Earl of Snowdon have mutually agreed to live apart. The announcement was a huge deal for the monarchy. Separations happened, but divorce was another story. The palace insisted there were no plans for divorce proceedings, but that didn't stop the firestorm. The woman who had given up the love of her life because of the taboo around divorce was now at the center of a messy public marital collapse. She became one of the first royals to feel the full, relentless glare of the paparazzi. The 2 years between the separation and the divorce were filled with public finger-pointing. By then, Tony's own affairs were an open secret in their circle. His long-term mistress, Lucy Lindsay Hogg, was a permanent fixture in his life. According to Margaret's lady-in-waiting, it was Lucy becoming pregnant in 1978 that finally pushed Tony to make the divorce final. On May 10, 1978, the palace announced the marriage was over. The statement confirmed the marriage had broken down, and the couple had lived apart for 2 years. The fairy tale didn't just fade away, it imploded, with consequences that would echo through the royal family for years. The divorce was finalized on July 11, 1978. It was a historic moment. While not the first royal divorce since Henry VIII, as is often claimed, it was the first for a senior member of the royal family since Princess Victoria Melita of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in 1901. For an institution built on the idea of lifelong marriage, it was a major rupture. Margaret, who was hammered by the press, unintentionally paved the way for the divorces of her niece and nephews years later. Lord Snowdon moved on quickly. Just a few months later, in December 1978, he married Lucy Lindsay Hogg. They had a daughter the next year. His life continued to be marked by affairs, and his marriage to Lucy also ended in separation after it was revealed he had fathered another child, a son named Jasper, with a magazine editor in 1998. Despite all the drama, he and Margaret remained on friendly terms, and he even continued to take official photographs of the royal family. Princess Margaret never remarried. The vibrant spark of her youth seemed to dim, and her health declined over the last 2 decades of her life. A lifelong heavy smoker, she suffered a series of strokes and died in 2002. The final shocking piece of the wedding day scandal came out in 2004, 2 years after Margaret's death. The DNA test confirming that Lord Snowdon had fathered Polly Fry during his honeymoon was a devastating final twist. It proved that betrayal had been woven into their story from the very beginning. When Lord Snowdon died in 2017, reports indicated that he left nothing in his will for his first secret child, Polly Fry. The scandal of Princess Margaret's marriage was more than just tabloid gossip. It was a turning point. It shattered the carefully crafted fairy tale image of the monarchy, revealing the messy human realities behind palace walls. The idea of a perfect royal marriage was broken for good. The story of Princess Margaret and Anthony Armstrong-Jones is a tragic, cautionary tale. It kicked off with the promise of a modern monarchy, a love that could connect ancient tradition to the swinging 60s. But the foundation was rotten from the start. That secret love child, hidden for over 40 years, is the ultimate symbol of the deception that defined their entire marriage. The years of bitter fights, mutual affairs, and public humiliation ended in a divorce that shook the establishment to its foundations. Princess Margaret, the rebel who gave up her first love for duty, ended up paying an enormous price for her second, much more public romance. Her story challenged the world's view of royalty, exposing the deep conflict between public duty and private happiness. The scandal didn't just rock a wedding day. It marked the beginning of a new, more complicated, and far more scrutinized era for the House of Windsor. If you were fascinated by this story of royal secrets, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. And be sure to check out our other videos where we dive deep into the most shocking moments in royal history. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.